Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood. Feeling blessed, never stressed.
I love that song. Katty, how you feeling?
Feeling good. Well, I'm feeling good because that song reminds me of the pre-pandemic life when I used to drive my daughter to school in the morning, when we used to go to school, and she used to play that song every morning. And so I have a lovely memory of her and me driving to school listening to it.
Yeah, that song's got all kinds of sunshine in it. Well, I'm thinking a lot of folks are maybe feeling better, whether it's the vaccine or something else.
Yeah, I think we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think, a year into this, it is a perfect time for us to reflect on how we've changed and how we haven't.
Hey, feeling good.
Hello, I'm Katty Kay in Washington.
And I'm Carlos Watson in California.
Welcome to When Katty Met Carlos,
a new podcast exploring what's shaping America today, brought to you by the BBC World Service and OZY Media. It goes without saying that this has been an incredibly tough year, but as things start to open up again, can Americans regain some positivity? Or has the traditional idea of American optimism been changed forever?
Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's the author of Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. Adam, the pandemic's been linked to an idea of collective trauma. Do you think that people have changed during the course of this year?
I think it would be hard to go through this, Katty, without changing in some ways, right? I think 2020 forced us to rethink so many assumptions we didn't even know we took for granted. From, is it safe to eat indoors at a restaurant, to can I possibly get any work done while I'm at home with 3 kids in online school, to, can I hug people outside in my bubble? And I think if you haven't been changed by those experiences, then you've basically been sleeping through the past year. I think the big question is whether it's going to change us more permanently. And one of my big worries is that we're not learning the lessons that 2020 should have taught us, which is we need to do our rethinking more proactively, not waiting until we were forced to question our assumptions and our habits and our opinions, but looking at the things that we believe that may not be true anymore or that might have never been true. And my hope is that in 2021 and beyond, we'll actually recognize that rethinking some of the past routines that are holding us back can liberate us from some of the things that we regret.
I want to bring in Dr. Cicely Horsham Brathwaite, who's a therapist, also an executive career coach based in New York. Needless to say, it's been a tough year, not only for everyone, but for African-American women in particular, from George Floyd's death to the fact that women are disproportionately affected by job losses due to COVID. Dr. Brathwaite, what have you seen among your clients as we get to the year point in the COVID struggle here? Are people finally settling in? Is there greater anxiety? Where are you seeing your clients at the moment?
Carlos, I'm seeing my clients all over the place at the moment. I think certainly there are people who are beginning to feel a bit of excitement as we see the rollout of the vaccine and the hope that that brings also as we get closer to warmer weather and being able to socialize outdoors in a way that is safe and comfortable. I also see that the accumulation of stress over this last year is really coming to a head for people, and that they are feeling like they are still needing to regroup, still trying to figure out how their lives can get back to some semblance of normal, but feeling worried about what the future might hold for them. The stress has been incredible. The American Psychological Association has just released its report about stress in America. And what we know is that stress has increased, and our ability to meet those stressors has not necessarily risen with that increase. So I'm seeing people feel concerned about the outcome, the long-term outcome of the pandemic on themselves, their families, their employment, and how they can regroup.
We thought we'd ask some Americans how they've been feeling through this pandemic. And Adam and Cicely, we'd like to hear your advice for them. Nat Nitch is a college student from Kansas.
I have been very, very cautious, and that's led to a lot of conflicting emotions. A lot of people that I follow on social media, like from high school, even a few people from college, have been posting pictures of themselves at like big parties, and it's like what are you doing? There's a pandemic going on. So I've unfollowed a lot of people. It makes me really, really angry to see people doing stuff like that. The self-care thing has been rough. My therapist keeps asking me how I'm taking care of myself, and I'm always like, I don't know. It feels like there's not much I can do, because what I really need is to be able to, for this to be over, and it feels really hard to pretend like anything else is going to fix how crappy I'm feeling, Oh
my God, Nat sounds so like my college-aged son at the moment. Adam, there's something there that Nat said that about how people have become, I don't want to use the word judgmental, but it does feel judgmental. I feel that one thing that's happened during this pandemic is, whether it's over masks or social distancing or socializing at all, people have become quite entrenched in their positions. I see it in my own family. I have family members who are very strict about COVID, and others who are like, oh, why are they being so strict? And I wonder, have we become actually more divided, more polarized because of this pandemic?
It seems like the answer is yes. I think we're still gathering lots of evidence, but my read of the data is polarization's gotten worse. I think, even before the pandemic, we had too many people thinking like preachers and prosecutors, which is basically, I'm right and you're wrong. And now that it's politicized, we have people's preaching and prosecuting moving in the direction of their politics, which is, okay, my side is right and your side is wrong, and probably bad too. And that obviously doesn't help us communicate effectively. I think, I'm not going to say that we should never judge other people. I think that anybody who's acting in a way that's clearly unsafe, if you look at the science, it's reasonable to look at them and expect that they do better. But making them feel judged, generally not effective. What seems to be much more effective is to try to ask questions about what their perspective is. And I think the questions we normally ask are the wrong ones. They're why questions. They're why are you doing that, which just motivates people to rationalize and justify and excuse their behavior. A better set of questions has to do with, well, how do you think that behavior is affecting others? What do you think is the impact of these choices? And some of the research on this, early days of COVID, said it was more effective to encourage people to not spread it than it was to encourage them to not get it. Because a lot of us are vulnerable to the illusion of immunity, right? We think, well, I'm not going to get it. But we know that other people might be at risk, and it's a little bit easier to be cautious once we start to think about the impact of our behavior on others.
Adam, you and I have talked a lot over the years about different ways that people can be in the workplace and in their lives, what have you. Talk about some of the things that you hope people will consider, that you think will be valuable for people to consider as part of a new way of being this summer and beyond.
Well, where to take that? There's so many different lenses that we could apply. I think one of the most useful ones that I've learned about is the psychology of responses to trauma. I assumed when I came into this field, I assumed that when people went through a traumatic event like a pandemic, that a lot of them would come out with PTSD. And post-traumatic stress disorder is real. It seems to affect about 15% of people after trauma, and that's horrible. I think there's some good news, though, which is over 50% of people experience the opposite of post-traumatic stress. It's called post-traumatic growth. It's the sense that you are in some way better because of the tragedy that you've endured. And that's not to say you wanted it or you would have chosen it, right? We all wish we could undo it, but given that we're stuck with it, we can choose to grow through it. So when you look at post-traumatic growth, it breaks down into people often feeling stronger. I got through that. I could get through almost anything. More grateful. I appreciate being able to have a job and to eat in a restaurant in a way that I probably wouldn't have before. Closer, feeling more connected to the people that you went through the adversity with. And then also open to new possibilities and seeing more purpose. Saying, okay, now I've really got to make my time count. And I think it's just, from my perspective, it's a big rethinking of what it means to be resilient, because I always thought about resilience as bouncing back. Post-traumatic growth tells us we can actually bounce forward. And I think that's something we're hoping that the economy will do, that the world will do, but also that we can strive to do emotionally.
I love you saying that. As a kid, I was in a very bad car accident, couldn't walk for 3 years. but I met a dancer named Ben Vereen, who some of you may remember, who's a famous dancer. And he took me aside and told me that he had broken his leg badly as a young dancer, but in fact, not only had come back, but had come back an even stronger dancer. And I went on to watch a performance where he was flying into the air and moving around in such a way that to your point, I will say it really gave me confidence in my ability to rehab and move forward. So I love hearing that and love learning that. Cicely and Adam, let me bring in another young man who had a bit of perspective to share. Julian Escoda is a student at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and he said to us that the events of the past year actually have made him completely change his approach. Take a listen.
When I first came to Emory, I originally intended on studying finance, and it was very nice at first, and I thought the experience was very informative, but once the pandemic started, it slowly helped me realize that it wasn't really something that I was passionate about. And once I realized that, I also remembered that every time I introduced myself to someone, I would always say something that involved music, and I figured that I would be more passionate about working in the music industry. The pandemic really forced me to just sit down and think about it and really to be honest with myself. And I guess in a way, the pandemic provided some clarity as well.
Cicely, have you seen any differences among your clients based on age? In other words, is Julian more open to change because he's young and there's something there? Or have you seen that kind of flexibility and that kind of reflection play out in the lives of lots of your clients across the age spectrum?
With my clients, I would definitely say that across the age ranges that I serve and have served over the years, I used to work in and lead college counseling centers. It is true that traditional college age is typically a time when people are exploring themselves, their lives, their futures. But I'm also seeing my clients who are seasoned in the workforce really looking at, is this actually how I want to spend my time? Is it still okay for me not to have a differentiation between when I'm working and when I'm living into my personal life? And so I have been really excited to support my clients in starting some new things, whether that has meant digging into a hobby, making a pivot in terms of their career, or thinking about how they work differently and set more appropriate boundaries within the workplace, irrespective of the role and rank and position that they hold. I really do think it is a time of reawakening.
Cicely, can I pick up on what Adam was saying earlier about PTSD? And I'm wondering whether we even know yet how much this has changed us. Because I talk to friends at the moment, and I certainly feel this. There's an element of me that is kind of thinking, I don't want to get back out there with the pressures of socializing. And actually, it's been nice sitting on the sofa with my teenage daughter and hang out and watching endless TV shows. And that there's a kind of a simplicity about it. But that's a mild anxiety. I'm just wondering whether this is going to hit us in 3 months, 6 months. The collective trauma of what the country has gone through. Is that going to hit us later, possibly?
I think that we certainly don't know yet because we are still in the middle of this or in the midst. But I do think we can look at our experiences after Hurricane Katrina, after Hurricane Sandy. We see the impact of such things at a time later. And it often takes people at a surprise that they may be impacted by something that happened months before. So I think it's very important for parents, for leaders to keep in mind that your children, your employees may be still experiencing the impact of this year that has been different than anything that we've experienced for many of us in our lifetime, and to enter that with a spirit of compassion and respond to it with equanimity, given all that people have been through.
Okay, as the Brit on this show, it is often my role to be the sort of Debbie Downer here.
You
and
would.
I wish I had
so typical,
always
predictable, Katty.
Californian. Why do I have to be the one that brings in the yes, but? Look, so Pew has a new lot of research out, and it's suggesting all the ways that the people have worked basically a lot more. The amount of time by which the average workday increased in 2020, 49 minutes. The percentage of paid time off that Americans left on the table last year, 33%. The percentage increase in meetings attended since the pandemic began, 13%. Adam, have we actually just taken on in a sort of, Americans are famous for being workaholics. Have we just become more workaholic? And have we set ourselves up for a return to normality, which is, more stressed, more work, more meetings, less time off? Okay, that's my little pessimistic bit over with.
No, this is not just a British fear. I think it's a very real concern in America, too. I think the first thing we have to ask is, where did that time come from? For a lot of people, it's been subtracting commute time and replacing it with work time, which is an improvement for many of us, right? So that's not inherently bad. I think where I get worried is when people fall into a pattern that's about a certain kind of workaholism, which is being a compulsive workaholic. This is something my colleague Nancy Rothbard has studied, and she finds that if you're a compulsive workaholic, you feel guilty when you're not working, you're stressed about falling behind, and you feel obligated then to be always on. There's another kind of workaholism that isn't bad. It doesn't predict negative mental health or physical health the same way that compulsive workaholism does. It's called engaged workaholism. It's when you work a lot because you find it intrinsically interesting and socially meaningful. And that's how I feel about my work. I've spent enough time, Carlos and Katty, with both of you to think that you might both be engaged workaholics too. And I don't think there's a problem with that, but I think that organizations have a responsibility to make sure that people don't feel pressure to do that, right? To set boundaries.
And do you think which do you think we've become more of during the pandemic?
I think probably some of both, right? I think because we're not commuting, because we're not traveling, because there's not that much else to do, a lot of people are worried about losing their jobs, and that's amplified the pressure to be a compulsive workaholic. There are other people, right, those of us who might be engaged workaholics, who are excited to take that time and pour more of it into work. So I think it's probably amplified both, would be my hunch, although I'd like to see more data.
How do you think about questions around race? How has that transformed, and how will it transform our next 6 months or next year as we re-enter the workspace and the workplace?
What I see are amazing examples of people who are speaking out about the injustices that they have experienced, not just in their communities, but within the workforce that has required a reckoning and a shifting in what people endure silently rather than instead what they speak about. And so I think that really shifts. I certainly was taught and raised about how to navigate environments that were culturally dissimilar to me. And obviously that worked out for me in terms of access to education and job opportunity. And that meant not having certain conversations or bringing things to light that were unjust. And so it is interesting and positive, in my view, that I see that young people who've been in the workforce for a while, are going public with their stories that is requiring CEOs, requiring educational institutions to really interrogate how they have operated for quite some time. And that to me is exciting.
Cicely, talk to me a little bit. I know you've got a wide range of clients, but among your Black female clients, anything interesting and surprising as we get to the year point here in terms of either how they're thinking, how they're feeling, what they're doing? Anything that has caught you by surprise?
One thing that ignites my passion for working with African American women is just the resilience. And that resilience is the willingness to also say, I don't feel strong. I feel overwhelmed. And so I have seen a chipping away at some of the stigma associated with speaking up about how one's doing and with regard to mental health, with regard to allowing your children to access mental health services. So that has been exciting. What I do worry about is that the level of stress related to racism and sexism. We know throughout the literature there is strong evidence that not only helps to wear down mental health, but physical health, and also fears about not getting equal treatment within the healthcare system is still something I feel concerned about and see the impact of for some of my clients, whether they've had family members or they themselves have been impacted by COVID and not always getting the treatment that they deserve, which makes it challenging. And I think also I see many examples of the women that I support being the ones who are supporting their families and are very active in their communities. And I do feel concerned that there has not been a letting go of some of that social activity that is volunteerism, and people still trying to do all the things despite running on empty.
Cicely, as a practicing therapist and at the end of a year that has been both in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the protests for racial justice and the awakening around racial justice that we've seen in the country, when you talk to your clients, what are the tips? What are the specific things that you suggest to them about ways to cope?
First of all, I let my clients know that it's important to focus on what we can control and to engage in a set of habits on a regular basis that help them to feel well. And so we work to curate a plan that most meets their needs. And the suggestions I make is to journal, to maintain a practice of writing down what you are grateful for, to spend time reading, to be in community with others, whether that is community online as a hobby or that is to engage in activism or advocacy, to really eat the foods that are associated with comfort in a way that is safe for your well-being, but particularly going back to the foods of your childhood or your culture of origin that feel really nourishing to you, spending time in nature, really immersing yourself in your faith, whether you identify as someone who is spiritual or religious, that those practices are very important, and also to do things to really take care of their bodies, which includes making sure that you get adequate sleep, making sure that you are moving your body, and that can be an exercise session or that can be a daily walk in nature, really going back to the basics around their well-being activities and self-care are the things that I suggest.
Carlos Watson, did you hear that? Adequate sleep.
Do you know what? We Californians are embracing a fresh cut at sleep, and that includes yours truly. And I'm excited for this new world. I'm excited for what's to come. We will see. Adam, Cicely, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. I do feel like this is such an important inflection point, and I'm glad that we had this conversation. And I know that our audience will find it valuable. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Carlos, I heard more optimism there than perhaps I was expecting.
Yep. I think that's fair. I think Adam's notion around post-traumatic growth captured that in a good way. And I think what Cicely said there in the end about people no longer, and in particular in many cases African-American women, although not only, not allowing stuff to just weigh on them or have to hold it in, but embracing the freedom to be able to share some of that and offload some of that, I think was a real positive. So both of those felt like good signs of optimism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do the yes, but again. I apologize, Carlos. I wonder whether there is also this feeling, and it's a feeling I have at the moment, and I love that notion of people being able to exhale, and particularly Black women being able to feel they can exhale. But I wonder there's also that sense that you touched on about regret almost. Did we use this time? I mean, and I'm constantly thinking I should have learned Spanish. I should have, learned to paint. I should have read the great Russian novels. And of course, I didn't do any of those things. Or people feeling, I could have lived, in Mexico for a year. Why was I stuck in Chicago or something?
I think there will be a little bit of regret, but I think even more than that, I think there will be a surge of energy. And, as funny as it sounds, and maybe the California kid has got to say this, I think part of it will come with the sunshine. So not only the vaccine and the good health, but as you knew I had to say it, but I think I do. I think part of it is the more people are able to be outside, be warm, I think good things will come with that. So here's to California dreaming.
I think you're just trying to make me feel jealous because I am still stuck in the Northeast winter. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of When Katty Met Carlos, a co-production from the BBC World Service
and OZY Media. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review, tell a friend, and of course, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you, and we'll be back soon.